Hello everyone, Michael here for Tactica Imperialis. Welcome to today's video. Today I want to talk about walkers. Walkers are a subtype of vehicles, and in my opinion, they are one of the best unit types in the game. And I want to explain why. Because walkers are a unit type that sort of come up in many armies, with the exception of basically Tyranids. I think they're in just about every army. Almost. Actually no, Tau don't have them. Should do, but don't. So they're pretty common. So it's good to talk about like what makes them good, because everybody's got them. But what makes them so good? I suppose you could consider this a 40k tactics light, because I'm mainly going to be singing the praises of such a unit as opposed to talking about how to beat them. Right. The walkers are very multifaceted. They have a lot of skills in a lot of places. And we're going to cover each of them in turn. So we're going to talk about their size, we're going to talk about their maneuverability, their firepower, their combat power, their resilience, and just generally somewhat what makes them so handy. Of course, towards the end of the video, because we have to try and match it up, we have to talk about how to deal with them. Although, to be honest, as an orc player, I'm not very qualified to tell you because I suck at it and I rely on my walkers extremely heavily. So with that said, I do think you'll find this video interesting. So let me know what you think by the end of it. Anyway, let's talk walkers. The first major skill of a walker is in its design, its footprint and its height. A walker, by which I'm talking mainly about dreadnoughts and their equivalents, stands roughly 2 infantry high. Maybe slightly less, it depends on the particular model. And this means that it is pretty hard to hit. If you hide it, it will hide behind most things infantry can hide behind. It can get behind a tank and will get a good cover save. It might be visible, just peeking out over the top, but it will get a cover save. It can stand behind infantry and in a lot of cases get a 5+ cover save for intervening models, which makes it very difficult for you to just isolate it with single shot anti-tank firepower like you would in a normal vehicle, because they're rather large. And even transport vehicles are a lot bigger than their walker counterparts. On top of that, they have a much smaller footprint in the majority of cases than both vehicles and monstrous creatures, which are the other immediate comparison we make with walkers is to monsters. Most monsters have a pretty large footprint, Carnifexes being the exception, which means that getting them into cover is kind of difficult, and obscuring them, as we've already mentioned with dreadnoughts, is a pain in the butt. So dreadnoughts can hide in woods very easily. They can hide in craters very easily. They are hampered by them, whereas monsters are not, because they have moved through cover. But they can get through them far better than vehicles who would shelter in them, because they don't get immobilized unless it's dangerous terrain. And whereas vehicles take dangerous terrain tests over difficult terrain. And this makes walkers an absolute nightmare to shoot at, because they can either hide up to a point or get a pretty decent cover save without trying too hard, which makes up for the fact that unlike some monstrous creatures who have great saves, and walkers have no saves, they get a save. It might just be similar to a monster's invulnerable if it has one, but this is counteracted by the fact that a monster has high toughness as well, and its armor save is generally obscene. But against anti-tank firepower, this doesn't really make that much of a difference. So yeah, walkers are annoyingly small. I'm not complaining. I like walkers. I mean, we're talking mainly about the dreadnought type of walker here. Obviously, if you get to the big stuff like Defilers, Soul Grinders, Gorkanauts and Morkanauts, then you're on a slightly different scale, so all the size stuff doesn't really come into play. But the whole moving through cover thing, that's still kind of relevant compared to vehicles of a similar cost. A Gorkanaut may be less resilient than a Land Raider, but it will walk through that terrain eventually, whereas that Land Raider might well immobilize itself. So that's their size. Now let's talk maneuverability. As we all know, walkers move like infantry. And what is good about infantry? They can get places. Yes, they can hop in transport vehicles, but they still can get places by hopping around the place. They can run if they're severely out of position or have nothing to shoot at, or need to make a dash for an objective, which vehicles can also do by going flat out and monsters can also do. And they can get through terrain in a way that a vehicle cannot. Walkers obviously follow the same principles. They're at risk from dangerous terrain, as all vehicles, monsters and infantry are, but they can get around places pretty easily. If they're out of position, they can run, and this means that they are very difficult to avoid. They also can use their footprint, at least in the Dreadnought case, to hide within battle lines, meaning that instead of being stranded in the middle of the line and unable to get places, in the case of, say, gun battery tanks or ginormous monsters, or even pretty big monsters like Tyrannofexes or Tervigons, then they can easily wander through a battle line without too much difficulty, allowing them to respond to threats to the infantry, such as heavily armoured stuff like Terminators, or other walkers, or monstrous creatures, or anything of that ilk. This makes Dreadnoughts, particularly, but all walkers, very adaptable. And this is only further reinforced by their weapons. Walkers can carry an obscene variety of weapons, from anti-infantry to anti-tank to anti-flyer, I think. I could be wrong on that, feel free to correct me in the comments. To a mix of everything. They can do any job for you, and even do both jobs at the same time. A Dreadnought rocking a missile launcher and an assault cannon, anti-infantry gun that can also hurt tanks, anti-tank gun that can also hurt infantry. Need I say any more? If you want them to do a combat role as well, they can wield power fists with underslung melter guns for anti-tank, and then still pack an autocannon or assault cannon to deal with infantry/light vehicles. In short, Dreadnought weapons are just ridiculous. They can pack so many good guns, often 2 at a time. I mean, in the case of Orc Death Dreads, you carry 2 guns, and then you still pack 2 power fists. This makes it very, very hard for your walker to not have something to shoot at, which means that if you don't need to run, it's very unlikely that you won't have a target, or that you're just going to be out of position. And if you are out of position, your guns are long ranged in many cases, so can do some decent damage when they connect, which is really, really helpful. So that's maneuverability and weapons. I don't think there's much more I need to say about their weapon loadout, but now we're going to talk about their hitting power, both at range, which we've sort of hinted at, and melee combat particularly. I'm going to come out and say this. Walkers hit too damn hard. Particularly anything that looks or sounds like a Dreadnought, or slightly bigger in things like Defilers and Soul Grinders. They hit obscenely hard. As I've said already, they can pack a huge variety of ranged weaponry, allowing them to deal with a multitude of tasks, and often 2 tasks at the same time. They can't split fire, but that doesn't matter. They can still handle any task that's put in front of them. Stick a monster in front of them? Okay, I'll use my anti-tank guns, and I've got some anti-infantry guns that can hurt you too. Stick infantry in front of them? No problem, man. Look at this, anti-infantry gun. Oh, maybe a spare one, and a power fist that will just smash through all of them in short order. Vehicle, power fist, underslung melter gun, twin-lit lance cannon. Bring it on. They can handle just about anything you put in front of them. And that's just at range. But in melee, they are devastating. Monsters in melee combat are weapon skill 3 or 4, maybe 5, 6 in the case of the really good ones, strength 6, AP 2, which often means hitting on 3s or 4s, wounding on 2s, ignoring your armor. That's pretty standard. But walkers are often weapon skill 4, strength 10, because they have a power fist, AP 2. Of course, if they have no power fist, then yes, they're strength 6, often AP dash. But most walkers do carry a power fist for such a scenario, at least if you're running a Dreadnought or equivalent. It's very rare you see them outfitted for all range, although it does happen. Which means that they instant kill toughness 4 and 5. And that's a really big deal, because if you are a toughness 5 hero who relies really heavily on being toughness 5, so power fists don't kill you, so bolters don't hurt you, oh, never mind, this thing's strength 10. Dead. This is particularly grating for me as an Orc player, as I've watched Orc war bosses be eviscerated by Dreadnoughts far too many times to count, and it's really, 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 really annoying. I can deal with it on my Orc knobs, because their toughness 4 power fist would kill them anyway. But my toughness 5 character is just being eviscerated. If I was fighting a monstrous creature, he's got to cause 3 wounds on me, and he's wounding on 3s. You're instant killing me on 2s. They hit really, really hard. And recently, as far as I'm aware, Dreadnoughts got an attack buff, as in they got more of them, which means that they hit really damn hard. They hit probably as hard as at least every similarly costed monster, and probably as hard as some of the big ones in melee. And that's saying something. I mean, they're not that big. They're not that scary, but they hit nearly as hard as most monsters. I mean, a Dreadnought hits as hard as a Carnifex, but the Carnifex is initiative 1 unless it charges. I could be wrong on that. So, Dreadnoughts are really, really good. You put them up against monsters, they will just punch like 3 or 4 wounds out of a monster, because monsters, kind of like orc characters, rely on their high toughness to absorb the damage. Nope, strength 10, winning on 2s, ignore your armor save. You don't have, yes, you get a feel no pain if you have it, and yes, you get an invuln if you have it, but walkers can easily cleave through 2 or 3 wounds from a monstrous creature if they roll well. It's really easy, particularly if that monster is weapon skill 3. Infantry, nobody cares. You're just mowing through them. It's so easy to just murder infantry. Even non-power fist infantry have a problem against walkers. Oh, sorry, non-power fist walkers are fine against infantry, for another reason we'll discuss in a minute. But even if it's just a few strength 5 or 6 AP dash attacks, you're still kicking dudes to death, and if there's anything that's toughness 3 with 2 wounds, well, you're dead. You're just straight dead. Eldar Farseer gets kicked in the face by a Dreadnought with 2 guns and dies. Would never happen, but you see where I'm getting at. So yeah, walkers hit too hard. I'm not complaining, I rely heavily on my walkers, but they hit really hard. Now you might think, well, maybe they're just a glass cannon. Well, they hit hard, they can do a bunch of jobs for you, they're really, really versatile, and they're pretty cheap in a lot of cases. But maybe you can just kill them really easy. I mean, they are vehicles after all. How hard can it be? Well, we'll get to that. Amongst the vehicle category, there is a simple way you kill them. You charge them. Because vehicles in melee are hit on 3s on their rear armor. Which is often 10, making it really easy for basic infantry to shred them. I'm talking Marines, charging Orc boys. They can easily put out a lot of damage to any tank that they charge. Many often pack crack grenades in the case of Guard, sometimes in Marines, allowing them to very easily deal with vehicles in close combat. It doesn't always work, but it often plinks up a couple of hull points at the very least. Walkers do not suffer from this issue. For a start, they're hit on their front armor. This makes them much harder to damage, it invalidates basic infantry every time, and it means that crack grenades go from glancing on 4s to glancing on 6s, power fists are now glancing on 4s. Which is really, really annoying, can I just point that out. Second of all, they have a weapon skill. And this means that it's harder to hit them. Instead of just being treated as weapon skill 1 all the time, as vehicles are, they're treated as they're having a natural weapon skill, unless they're immobilized and possibly if they're stunned, which means that you're hitting them on 4s in many, many cases. Sometimes even through 5s if you're dropped to weapon skill 1 by fear or something like that, because I can make walkers cause fear. I think the soul grinder causes fear. Maybe even the super heavy walkers cause fear as well. So it is a nightmare to try and deal with a walker in close combat the same way you would do with a normal vehicle, and to make it even worse, as I already mentioned, it's kicking the bejesus out of you because it's got power fists and all that other good stuff. What about range? Well, I already talked about their size making them easy to hide, and it's true. They're so hard to hit at long range, and to be honest, when you've got an army that has things like Land Raiders and Land Raiders, Predators, Anti-Flyers, guns, Storm Raven gunships, as Space Marines do, are you really going to waste your Devastators with las cannons on that little dreadnought? No, you're not. Unless it's a free kill. Even Necrons could do it, but I did the math. To kill a dreadnought, you require 3 6s. That's 18 hits, which for an average Necron warrior squad is 2 salvos, at bare minimum. And that's assuming they don't get charged or killed in any way, shape or form. And that's for between 10 and 20 man squad. For a 10 man squad, it's 2 rapid fire salvos. For a 20 man squad, it's 2 full range salvos. Just to kill 1 walker. And that's 2 rounds of bolter fire gone from your Necron army, which is pretty irritating. You might think, well, it's Necron, they should have no problem, but it's still a thing, particularly when there's a lot of them. So yeah, walkers are unholy resilient, and they can be even more resilient. Extra armor, keeping them moving, to chop you up in the face in close combat, with things like it will not die. In the Orc case with Grot Riggers, Defilers have it will not die. They have invulnerable saves. They are really, really difficult to put down. Their typical vehicle weakness is gone, and that being low rear armor because you're not hit on it unless you're immobilized or possibly stunned, and you do damage back, meaning that your opponent can't just sit there and keep trying and trying and trying because you're actually going to kill him at some point and make him run away and then run him down because you have a good initiative value in a lot of cases, unless you're an Orc and they're initiative too. You might think, and the main weakness I think that Walkers could have is the crack grenade. I mean, I find that very often my killer cans get murdered by frag grenades, but that's because they're armor 11, not armor 12, like a standard dreadnought, and anything that's armor 13 or above on the front, like a Defiler or a Morkanaut, has nothing to fear from crack grenades. Melter bombs, pretty rare, so you're not going to find them off that often. Honestly, the best way to kill Walkers is with armor-bane weapons, but they're incredibly rare and incredibly expensive. So there you go. That's why I think Walkers are so good. They have the maneuverability of infantry. They're not very big. They have a huge array of weapons, so they hit as hard as most vehicles, and even harder than some vehicles in the really big Walkers cases. It's stupidly good in close combat, like they hit as hard as monstrous creatures, and putting them down is a colossal nightmare. I should know. The amount of times I had to rely on power claws to dig me out of a hole, and it just hasn't worked because I only have like 3 attacks and I guns on 4s. No, not working. So how do you deal with these armoured behemoths? But they're not even behemoths. They're not even that big. And they're dirt cheap. And I just point that out, they're dirt cheap. Like, a Dreadnought is like 100 odd points. Not many. A Death Dread is less than 100 points if you upgrade it right. So you can just easily spam these things. And obviously, there are formations that include them. I'm looking at the Dread mod particularly, which is just ridiculous. So how do you stop them? Well, let's have that discussion, shall we? And of course, let me know in the comments. Alright, how do you stop a Walker? Well, the first tactic, and it's tried and tested and true, is to throw a fearless blob of something at it. That way, it's stuck, bogged down in your dudes forever. Great things for doing this are Imperial Guardsmen, particularly conscripts, because they can never hurt it, but they're fearless if you had a priest in there. And the priest can technically smash with like an eviscerator or something and actually maybe do some damage. Plague Bearers of Nurgle, because they have invulnerable saves. You could also use Pink Horrors for this purpose because they are a little bit tougher, and the Plague Bearers feel no pain is invalidated because of the high strength of the weaponry. Orc Boys, because as long as you make them fearless in some way. So running the Wild Gazkul detachment and having Gazkul lead your army, having them be from the Wild Gazkul Codex, meaning that it's almost impossible until they get to a really low size that they're going to run away. But to be fair, doing it from Codex Orcs will also be fine. Honestly, you're better off doing it from Codex Orcs because that way you've got a 50-50 chance of it not relying on having a lot of dudes. And yeah, they're the best ones. Oh, Chaos Cultists as well. They do a good job as well. But if you're not an army that can do that, you're not a horde army, you don't have weapons that can do it, how do you do it? Well, the same way you deal with vehicles crossed with how you deal with monsters. So, Haywire. Haywire is your friend, as is Armorbane. Haywire and Armorbane are your friends. Particularly if you are going up against them in close combat, you need it. A lot. So, if you can invest in Haywire grenades, or EMP grenades if you're Tau, do it. Do it. And if you are not an army that can get it, get Chain Fists. Or anything with Armorbane that can fight in close combat, because then you can actually get through their armor if you're not Strength 5. Because once you go up to Strength 8, you're glancing on 4s. Sure, cool, great, helpful, thank you. I do appreciate that, but that's a 50-50 to do any damage whatsoever, and I've got to do that for 3 rounds. Now, just give me a Chain Fist, I'll pen it every time. That way, at least there's a good chance that I'll be able to, what am I thinking? You know, maybe immobilize it, force it to be hit on 3s now. That way, I've got more chance of pinning it later. Maybe rip that Power Fist off, which would be really, really helpful. Or just do something. So Armorbane is your friend, but it's expensive. With your ranged weapons, you don't need to devote your las cannons and your orbital bombardments to it, or whatever your weapons are. What you need to do is hit it with a lot of cheap mid-arms fire, I think. So, a Dreadnought, because it can get into cover, can easily shrug off a las cannon thanks to a 5+ cover save. But it can't shrug off so easily a lot of shots from autocannons, multi-shot rocket launchers like cyclone missile launchers, particularly if they're coming from behind like via deep strike. It is very hard for it to shrug them off the same way. Because if it turns to face, it opens up its guns to the rest of your army and you can hit with things like bolt guns. If it doesn't turn, well, it's just going to keep getting pummeled and pummeled and pummeled. And if you fall to take many cover saves, eventually it's going to let 2 or 3 through and then it's going to be dead. Or at the very least crippled beyond all recognition. So what you need to do is hit it and hit it and hit it. Think of it as the same way as you look at monsters, only with slightly bigger guns. With monsters, you can just spam them with bullets. Eventually they're going to take some wounds. You might be wounding on 6 and they have a 3-up save, but they're going to take some wounds eventually. Same idea, but you need bigger guns because your basic guns can't hurt them. This is another reason as to why walkers are so resilient, by the way. They can't be wounded by basic weapons and basic infantry in close combat. Or at range. So you do have to hit them with some pretty bigger guns. So anything above a heavy bolter, so assault cannons, auto cannons, these guns are pretty helpful. And anything that's like multi-shot, or you can get a lot of them on cheap, to just blast a walker to oblivion, you can do it. A flyer will do an excellent job because its guns are designed to deal with lightly armoured flyers. Anything that packs like, I'm thinking of a Helldrake, particularly with its Hades autocannon or something like that. If you ever run it and it's strength 7 vector strike, very good at dealing with walkers because it can just hit them and be pretty much invulnerable in return. So yeah, the way you deal with walkers for me is Haywire and Armorbane or just spam. Spam of small arms. Or mid arms. The small arms have to go on everything else. If you're fighting a full walker list and your opponent hasn't okayed it with you, well, punch them in the face. No, don't do that. No, I'm not condoning you do that. Don't do that. But if you are trying to beat an all walker list, well, 1, what are you thinking? And 2, try and find as many of those weapons as you can find because you're going to need them. So yeah, that is my thoughts on walkers, why I think they're so good, and a few little ways that you can try and stop them. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd be very interested to see what you have to say about what you think are the best units in the game. I'm talking about unit types here. Yes, I could, look, I've focused primarily on the Dreadnought and its sort of siblings from other armies, but this can go more generally to walkers overall, particularly the bigger ones, like smaller ones like Sentinels and Killer Cans, not so much, but the idea kind of applies. So I'd be interested to see what you think is the best type of unit in the game, other than Super Heavies and Gargantuans, because those guys are just obscene anyway. So let me know what you think, and make sure to subscribe if you have not. We're well on a road to 1,000 subscribers, and I would always appreciate your support. Thank you very much for watching the video. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis. Until the next time, I'll see you all again. Bye for now.